Thank you for staying with the Monday Report. Let's start the discussion on the state of education. And right now, I'd like to hear from you, Trevor Mbija at CitizenTV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. My guests are with me, starting from my farthest right, Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, Executive Director of SAWA Agenda. Thank you for making time. We have Dr. William Sugut, Director of Secondary Education and from the Ministry of Education. Thank you for making time. And Dr. John Mugo, CEO Zizi Afrique. Thank you for making time. And Manyasa, I'll start with you on this. What are some of the key insights that you found out from this report when it comes to education?
Thank you, Trevor, for having me. This report was co-authored by Dr. Mugo and myself, yes. And we went back to the data that exists. We did a few interviews with key stakeholders, and some of the things that we found that were interesting were the levels of shortages at the different levels of the teachers that are required. We saw the gaps in infrastructure, especially in terms of labs and digital infrastructure in schools. We saw a few gaps in the issues of water sanitation in schools, with, in many cases, more learners using one toilet than recommended by the Ministry of Education. And so those are some of the things that we saw, and we think that there are issues that are not difficult to be able to resolve, but they will require a very open conversation among stakeholders, because they will require some radical changes in the way we have organized education currently.
Okay. Dr. Mugo, let me bring in on this before I bring in Dr. Rugut. And it's interesting what Marcus has mentioned. I was reading that report, and on page 7, according to your report, optimal teaching staff level should be at around 472,205. Yet we have 360,365. That's a staffing gap of about 111,870. What is the impact of such a gap when it comes to the quality of education in the country?
Thank you so much, Trevor, and good evening to viewers. The gap of 111,000 is actually the number that is given by government. And when we say 111,000, the burden is not equitable. So you'll find that there are some parts of the country that bear the brunt, especially arid areas where it's very difficult to hire teachers or motivate them or even maintain them in the schools. Then also when you look at the levels from primary to junior to senior, you find that the shortages are also not equitable. So you'll find that senior schools are bearing a heavy burden of shortage. Junior schools have a shortage, but mainly in terms of the learning areas and how the teachers are distributed. But Trevor, when we do research on what matters for children to learn, the teacher is the single most. So that it is better to have a teacher who is good with children under a tree than have a story building that is really nice without teachers or without teachers that are motivated. So the opportunity we have now as a country is to leverage this huge workforce and make those teachers good, and especially discovering ways of and methods of like teachers that are teaching large classrooms. There are teachers that have 100 learners, have 90, and there are methods that can work in those contexts. So first of all is to look at areas that are very understaffed. There is an opportunity that we can use in terms of redistributing teachers across the levels, across the learning areas, but also when we are employing, like now, government has announced that they'll be employing 26,000, ensuring that employment we depoliticize, because now it has become political. If we remove politics from the hiring, then hiring can be done the right way, so that the right places are prioritized for staffing.
Interesting. Let's deal with these issues one at a time. Now let's start with the teachers' gap. And Dr. Sugut, I spoke to the PS earlier on, and he had a concern with these numbers. Are these numbers accurate, and are they from the government, that there's a staffing gap of 111,870?
Thank you, Mbija, and good evening, viewers. I think what is critical is that we agree that teachers are very critical in any education system. and they play a very, very important role in terms of ensuring that the curriculum is delivered. But in terms of those numbers, I think we need to go back to it, because the accurate number is that we are actually 434 teachers. And therefore...
434,000?
4,000, yes.
So not 472,205?
That is what we have, and therefore the shortage comes to around 40,000. So in that case, then, it means if we employ 24,000 this year, and then next year we also employ another 20 or 18 to 20,000 next year, we will really be done. I think what I want to agree with my brothers here is that once we have those numbers, we can therefore look at their distribution to see that we are using them optimally and they are able to reach our children. Otherwise, we accept that teachers are very critical, but those numbers a bit, I think, are not accurate.
So according to you, the gap is 40,000?
Yes, 40,000.
11,000.
And that's what the government is working towards. And I think given the numbers, because we are also concerned, and we are really on top of things to ensure that our learners, our children get education that is quality. And we do agree that the teacher is the single most important factor in terms of performance. But it's only those numbers that are not accurate, and we are happy that we are working with them also to be able to really get accurate figures so that they can also appreciate what we are doing in the ministry with regard to what is available on the ground.
So how are you going to bridge this gap, whether it's 111,000 or 40,000, and yet there's no budget allocation for that?
Well, there are plans, and I think through the commission, the ministry, through the Teacher Service Commission, is going to hire another 24,000 this year, before December. And then next year, the balance will be hired to be able to address that. Because whereas it concerns stakeholders, even as a ministry, again, we are also concerned. And it is our wish and prayer that we really attain the kind of requirement that we need to be able to deliver quality education.
Okay.
And those are provisions. From the history that we have had from 2022, you've seen we've 46,000 employed, another 20,000 employed, now at 76,000. That is serious commitment. And the ministry is working towards that.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Manyasa, what are the possible solutions to deal with this? And are you buying that conversation from the government that the gap is not 111? I know you both co-authored this report. You're saying the gap is 40,000, not 111.
So I don't want to dispute the figure the director has given, but the figures we gave you came from the TSC documents. They were looking at that as the gap. It is also possible that that gap may have reduced because there was recruitment earlier this year, which may have reduced that gap from the 111 that was captured in the TSC's plan to another figure that may not really be 40,000, given that just this June, just this June, 12,000 teachers retired from TSC. So that increases the gap that still needs to be filled. But I'm sure it is not 111, it must be less. That I have to own up, given that, and we made that provision when we were presenting this report. We said this is based on TSC data before January this year. And so the recruitment that happened this year may have narrowed this gap below that number. What I need to agree on with the director and suggest a few things that need to be done is the fact that the distribution of teachers in this country is extremely skewed. We have places where there are absolutely no teachers, and we have places where there is overstaffing. And that is, I'm sure the director knows that. But there are challenges that TSC faces in terms of what it is able to do to ensure this distribution. One of the things that they face as an obstacle is the TSC Act. The TSC Act provides, excuse me, that when you set up a new school, the TSC is mandated to give you a school head. And once they've given you the head, they have fulfilled the requirements of the TSC Act. So they then tell you, we'll give you other teachers when they become available. And that becomes a challenge. In the meantime, you have children in the school without teachers because the Act does not mandate them to ensure equity in distribution of teachers. And I think that that is something that needs to be considered for review to make sure that it is mandatory to TSC to ensure equity, and then provide them with the tools by which they can be able to ensure that equity in distributing teachers. There are practices that other countries have. For instance, in other countries, we know that if you work in a hardship area, you're put on a faster career progression path. And that becomes an incentive for many teachers to want to work there. In some other, in the police service, for instance, we know that it is almost mandatory to work in certain regions of this country, what they call the operation zones. Every police officer at some point serves in an operation zone. So it can also be the same case that we say teachers will rotate across the country because you have an obligation to serve all the children of Kenya equally. So it's important to focus on that distribution. I know there is going to be review of school establishment guidelines happening. We have to face that fact that part of the shortage in teachers that we have is because we have a proliferation of schools that is almost unplanned. So you find in one small area, there are so many public schools there, each one of them with a few learners, and now each one of them requiring equal number of teachers for the teachers to be enough. Because if you have 5 learning areas in a small school, you still need 5 teachers, even when you will put these learners in a neighboring school where there are already 5 teachers and there will be no need for additional teachers.
So just to clarify that, Dr. Manyasa, when you say proliferation of schools, do we mean that there are too many schools cramped up in the same region, or do we have too many schools in general?
We have areas where schools are very far apart, and I know that government will be working on ways to make, to increase numbers of schools in some of those areas, especially in nurseries. You find the closest school is 50 kilometers away, and children as young as 7 years have to board because it's not possible to commute to and from school. But then we have areas of this country, the mainly high potential areas, as they call them, where there's too many schools. For some reason, someone convinced our politicians, members of parliament to be precise, that the easiest development project for you to initiate is build a school. So you are elected for 5 years, you start a school here, you are voted out, the next person who comes does not develop this school because it was started by you, it will give you mileage, starts another and the next door. So TSC is forced to pick one good teacher from here and make them head of this other one. Yeah. Create a shortage here, put here a few teachers who cannot be optimal in their service delivery. And so we have that problem. We have places where we will have to be bold on how to deal with that proliferation.
Okay. Dr. Mugo, what do you recommend? You've mentioned a few things like the politics of hiring the teachers as one of the major challenges. What do you recommend going forward to deal with this issue of shortage of teachers, staff?
The good thing, Trevor, is that there are many things to celebrate right now. Like one of them, we've done research over the years that shows that staffing areas like Marsabit or Mandera or Wajir, we will have to have ways of training teachers there. Because if you get the young people, bring them to Kitui, from Wajir and train them there, they won't go back because everyone desires something better for themselves. And so the starting of new teachers training colleges in those areas, for instance, and incentivizing young people in secondary schools to want to become teachers is one good thing that is happening. So if you go to Mandera now, you'll get an enrollment of more than 700. I was in Wajir over the weekend, a new college, Tarbaj, has students. The other thing is the opportunity to deal with non-viable schools, as Dr. Manyasa is saying. There's just too many schools that are not viable. A secondary school that has an enrollment of less than 300 is not viable. Because when you look at the subject distribution and the staffing that has to happen, it means you will have some teachers that are not hitting the minimum number of lessons per week, which means either we collapse such small schools so that we share teachers, or we have a way of having schools that are near each other share teachers for certain subjects, like the practical subjects that don't have very many lessons. And or also now in the competency-based education, we are having pathways like technical. We have vocational training centers, we have technical vocational colleges that have technical teachers. We have to now break the walls so that we share them. But the other opportunity is motivating teachers and celebrating teachers. We think that a better salary is all that a teacher wants. But teachers also need recognition. We have many teachers that are doing amazing work, but because our default is to look at what is not working, we never get to celebrate and acknowledge the innovation of teachers that are doing really well. So how can communities, how can schools, how can as a society, how can we go back to celebrating those teachers and showcasing the very good practices that can be adopted so that the learning outcomes can be accelerated?
Okay, but then how do you deal with that at a time when there's the localization, I believe that's what it was called, where now you move the teachers around, some of them don't want to go, they're not supposed to be where they were born. Is that something that's sort of shooting yourself in the leg, so to speak, from the Ministry of Education? There is the technical and the political angle to teacher distribution. Now, the default for anyone, not just for teachers, but even doctors or anyone, is to be nearer where they are your interests. But of course, we know from evidence that when you look at things like absenteeism, it's highest among people that are working at home, for obvious reasons. And so the delocalization policy was actually following evidence to try and move teachers to places and facilitate them to be able to focus on where they were. But now the political angle to it, politicians would be happy to have teachers working at home. So that tension between these two, I think, is one that needs to be resolved. Yeah. We have allowed politics too much, I think, to interfere with education, and that is why, as Emmanuel says, instead of allowing data and the ministry to establish schools where, depending on the map, we have allowed CDF, to decide where to plant schools, which actually shouldn't be happening. Okay. And Dr. Sugud, what is the plan for all these three main issues that have been brought up by your fellow panelists? One, skewed distribution of schools, proliferation of schools, and then there's recognition of teachers. So let's start with the first one, skewed distribution.
Thank you, Trevor. I think the question of skewed distribution of teachers and the question of proliferation of schools and motivation of teachers, of course, the issues that touch on the teachers in terms of the human resource and all that is within the mandate of the Teacher Service Commission. But again, this to some extent also is contributed to by the number of schools that we have. So the Ministry of Education is keen on this kind of data. And data does not lie. We are also looking at how many schools do we have. Like when you look at secondary schools now, we have a total of 9,605 public secondary schools. 2,700 of those schools have an enrollment of less than 150. So then that is a discussion that the ministry will entertain, and in consultation with stakeholders, look at the viability of those institutions. And then we get a way forward in terms of what then do we do with this? Is it serving us well? Are we able to optimize the teachers that we have, these institutions? Of course, without affecting the question of access, ensuring that every learner, every child gets education or accesses education. But we must also be alive to the fact that there are certain schools that may not be viable. It is something that we will look at and we work on. And once that is worked on, Trevor, it therefore means the distribution will definitely improve. The question of possibly motivation and the rest of the issues that come up will be addressed. And we are happy with what my brothers have noted also again, that we now have TTCs in areas that initially we thought were a challenge, and the ministry is very keen on this to ensure that issues of access, issues of retention, and issues of completion are addressed.
Okay. So what is the short-term plan, though, when it comes to simple things like teacher recognition, like what Dr. Rugo is saying? That goes a long way. instead of just...
Yeah, that's why I've said, well, I don't want to commit here on the issue of teacher recognition because that is the mandate of the commission.
Yes. But is there a conversation around, are you aware of it?
Definitely the commission is working.
You know are not viable.
Yes.
You also know some of the gaps that are in the Ministry of Education in general.
What I know the commission has worked on critically is to ensure that the teachers are comfortable. And that is why they are discussing issues of promotion. You saw recently what happened with regard to promotions. And given budget requirements, we also hope that this will be addressed. And the commission, I can assure you, is also working on this to be able to ensure that teachers are comfortable. Because one thing that we do agree is that once the teacher is comfortable, then it translates into successful curriculum delivery. And this definitely touches on the performance of the learners, because the learners are also motivated when the teachers are motivated, when the teachers are present in class, when the attendance is good, and even the attendance and performance by learners also improves.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's on the teachers' staffing. And Dr. Manyasa, you also mentioned gaps in infrastructure. What did you find?
So in terms of gaps in infrastructure, it's mainly for specialized learning areas. Labs are inadequate. Computer labs are mostly not there in most of our secondary schools. As per the report that we are releasing, just about 33% of the schools of our current secondary schools are actually offering computer studies by the start of this year. That tells you that those are the schools which are ready to be able to offer computer studies come January next year. And computer studies under CBE is now a compulsory learning area.
And only 33% are ready.
33% are currently offering. So those are the ones we can say confidently are ready because they already have computer labs, they have computers for students' use, and they have teachers who have been teaching computer studies, so they're ready. The rest require capacitation to be able to be ready by the end of the year. So that is one of those gaps that I can point out. We can point out the issue of labs, especially among junior schools. Majority of junior school learners are struggling to access lab facilities, and that is another challenge because our aspiration and the aspiration of CBE is to transition 60% of the learners from junior school to STEM pathways in senior. And for us to get there, we need them to be exposed to these facilities in junior school, to be able to access labs, to be able to access enough numbers of STEM teachers who can then prepare them for transition into STEM pathways. And that is a gap. The other gap is around the new learning areas that are being introduced. Now we have music. For a very long time, government was not absorbing music teachers, so a lot of students never enrolled to train as music teachers. Home science, areas where government had not been posting, so people shunned to train in them. Areas like art and design, these are areas which have been introduced, but where we now need staffing that is not there currently. We need those design rooms if you're going to be able to offer art and design. So those are gaps that we can be able to see in infrastructure and in personnel at the same time to be able to prepare, especially our senior schools, to be ready come January next year to offer the different pathways. All schools are ready for the humanities pathway. That is straightforward. All schools are ready.
Yeah.
Many schools are ready for STEM, but not all. Majority of sub-county schools are not ready to be STEM schools because majority of them don't have science facilities and majority of them don't have STEM teachers. As per a study we did last year, November, 35% of our junior schools did not have a single STEM teacher. I know that has been corrected by the recruitment early this year, but recall, we're recruiting those STEM teachers in those schools January this year when these kids are going to grade 9. They cannot be ready to transition to STEM after missing a STEM teacher in grade 7 and 8, and they get a STEM teacher in January of grade 9. Yeah. They will not be ready to transition to STEM. I feel that there is still a lot to go on to make our junior schools the foundation for STEM education. which is where we are trying to move as a country.
Okay, we'll come to that in just a short while. Let me take a quick break here. When we come back, we'll find out now what are the solutions to this and how do we now then leverage on public-private partnerships, especially when you transition to STEM and AI, for example, because that's where we're heading now as a country. What is the plan? We'll keep your views coming at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. See you in just a bit.